Hello, everybody, everywhere. We are wide. We are worldwide. This is Travis Oscar Mike Radio number 199. One more and it's 200, but we have 199 of these underneath my proverbial belt. Oscar Mike Radio sponsored by Joyce Asack of Asack Real Estate, Mark Holmes of Reaper Detailing and Power Washing, Get Reaperfied, and Sean Schubert of Red Seal Martial Arts. There is no losing. And usually on shows, on podcasts, I have a lot of positivity and uplifting stuff and overcoming obstacles. This is not really one of those at first. I am pleased to have Shawn Quigley of the National Parks of Boston coming on to talk to me about the 54th Massachusetts Regiment monument that was defaced, his involvement with restoring that and what happened. Shawn, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Shawn, looking at this situation, one of the things that really kind of upset me about this is not the first time a monument has been defaced or vandalized or outright destroyed in the greater Boston area. There was one, I think, in Dorchester that got damaged earlier this year or last year, and it's happened before, but this one was notable because this happened during the protest around the George Floyd incident and Black Lives Matter, and this regiment epitomizes everything that is good about America and ending slavery, and it really kind of compelled me to reach out to you. So thank you for coming on. I just want you to start with, your background as, working for the National Parks of Boston, because you've been doing this for a while, right?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. I have been working for the National Parks of Boston now for over 8 years. I started in May of 2012, so I've been here for a while. And I have spent most of my time focused on the history of Boston's free African-American community that lived on the North Slope of Beacon Hill.
Oh, wow.
Really roughly from the American Revolution through the Civil War. And this is, that story is really encompassed in the site, a national park site, Boston African-American National Historic Site, which is one of 3 major national parks in downtown Boston.
When you started doing this, what did you learn about, the African-American experience in Boston during this time?
So to be completely honest, when I came to Boston, I grew up in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, so about an hour south of the city. And I was always interested in history. I went to Suffolk University.
Oh, wow.
And so again, right in the middle of downtown Boston. And I was very interested in the American Revolution. The history of the founding of the country, Boston's role in that always grabbed me ever since I was really a little kid coming in and doing the Freedom Trail. And to be completely honest, I didn't really know anything about the history of the North Slope and the community there. But through Suffolk, I was able to get an internship with Boston African-American National Historic Site. And once I really started to immerse myself in this history, I couldn't turn away.
Oh, really?
I think one of the things that Boston, and rightfully so, has a reputation as the city really embracing the history of the Revolution. But the history of Boston, isn't just related specifically to the American Revolution. It really is a city of revolution throughout, from 1776 on to the present day. And the North Slope of Beacon Hill community, it's a social revolution.
In what way?
So it's a small community, right?
Okay.
You look at the 1860 census in Massachusetts, you have roughly 2,200 African Americans living in the city, and roughly about 2/3 of that is on the North Slope of Beacon Hill. So really we're talking from like roughly Mount Vernon Street, which is kind of like the top of Beacon Hill, down to Cambridge Street at the bottom. So it's pretty compact. So it's a small community, only about 1.5% of Boston's entire population, but they are instrumental not only in fighting locally in Boston for civil rights, but also nationally in the fight against the institution of slavery. And we talk about this story on our Black Heritage Trail walking tour, which is kind of the more or less, along with the Museum of African American History and the African Meeting House, this is kind of the main attraction of the MPS site. And that tour kicks off at the Shaw Memorial. And what we like to say about the Shaw is it's really kind of a culmination of the efforts of those men and women on the North Slope through their decades of activism, pushing locally for, again, as I said, civil rights, pushing to desegregate schools, desegregate railroads, and laws that ban interracial marriage, and also simultaneously Underground Railroad sites, resistance to the fugitive slave law. And all these things really culminate with the 54th Massachusetts, which really couldn't have been formed without that foundation laid by those men and women on that North Slope.
So tell me more. The only thing I really learned about the 54th, and I knew about the monument in Boston, was from that movie Glory. That really kind of, that movie came out like 20 years ago or even longer. I can't remember, but that's where I learned about it. And at first you couldn't believe it. Then you started reading about it, and like, wow. I mean, Frederick Douglass's, kids signed up and enlisted. It's a storied history. So I mean, tell me more about that, because I really, was the movie accurate, or did it take some liberty with certain facts?
Well, I mean, I think like any Hollywood movie, there, are going to be a few liberties that are taken. But I think what the power of that film and why I think it's so important is because of what you just said. You never heard of really the 54th before the movie Glory. That's something that brings it onto kind of a mainstream conscious. People become more aware of it, and they're going to read about it and learn more. I think really one of the major discrepancies that I think that we see in the film Glory is kind of it appears that most of the men, the soldiers, are kind of more or less portrayed as, fugitives from enslavement. And that really, the case. Yeah, that really wasn't the case. It's roughly 80% of the regiment are men who were born free, born in the North. And I think also what's important to note, and what's really powerful about the 54th Massachusetts, is that it's not just men coming from Boston or from Massachusetts. These men that formed that regiment, they came from all over the northern United States. When that call went out in late January, early February of 1863, allowing for black men to enlist in the Army, so many men tried to sign up and fight, they actually had to turn away roughly a third of the people who did so. Yeah, they ended up forming another regiment called the 55th Massachusetts. So the 54th, it's roughly 1,007 men strong, all over, as I said, from the northern United States. And with all these volunteers and people signing up, they really kind of were more or less the best of the best. But they really had to be. And that's not just because of the hardships that they would face as Union soldiers, but really because of the hardships that they faced because of the color of their skin. There were many laws and hurdles and things put in place that, did not necessarily set these men up for success.
Yeah, because even after that, it wasn't until the middle of the 1940s and after that there was integration. I mean, the Tuskegee Airmen were not allowed to fly with white pilots. There were no mixed units like in D-Day. All the drops were made by white troops. The black troops were not. So there must have been insurmountable challenges back then for them to serve, and they served with pride, from what I understand, from what I've read.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a very valid point. The United States Army remained segregated up until 1948. So we're talking after, obviously, World War II. And, these men have to fight in separate units. They have to be led by white officers. When they signed up to fight, they were told that they were going to be paid the typical wage of a Union Army soldier, which was $13 a month at the time period. But yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot of money now, wow. But yeah, decent chunk of change in 1863. But, when they received their first paychecks, they're only paid $7. $3 were taken out for their uniforms, which did not happen with white soldiers. And then another $3 were taken out because, according to Congress, these men were actually laborers, not soldiers. So what I think is, What I think is very powerful about these men, too, is the fact that, there obviously is that scene in the movie. There's a very famous scene in the movie Glory where they get their first paychecks, and Denzel Washington is calling for the men to tear up their pay, and they rip up their pay sheets, and the leader of the 54th, Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, played by Matthew Broderick, he gets up and he says, "We're not going to get paid." And maybe that scene didn't happen that dramatically, but it did happen.
Oh, really?
The men of the 54th Massachusetts refused pay for 18 months. When they fight their most famous battle at the Battle of Fort Wagner, they're not being paid for it. They're boycotting their pay because they want to be recognized for the equal work that they are doing. The governor of Massachusetts at the time, who was instrumental in getting the regiment formed, his name was John Albion Andrew. He was a white man, but he offered to kind of offset their pay, saying, "We can take it out of the Massachusetts budget. We'll make sure that you're paid equally." And the men said no. They said that they wanted to be recognized by Congress for the work that they were doing, and it eventually did happen. They did receive back wages for their, their work, their service, I should say. But 18 months, it's a year and a half. I mean, these men have families. This is a good, this is a way for them to be sending money back, and they're not doing it because of those principles, because this is really for them. This is a two-fronted war effort, because they're not just fighting the South and the rebellion. They're also fighting Northern prejudice and segregation, which I think, again, speaks to the character of these men, speaks to their bravery, and speaks to why there is, a monument to them.
One of the things that kind of struck me as I kind of dug into this too is at the time it seemed like in so many ways, Massachusetts gets, a reputation for being a certain way, but even back then it seemed like in certain areas that because of Frederick Douglass and other people that, a lot of people in Massachusetts and the Boston area had accepted these Black, people, men and women as, equal Americans. And it was, like you said, they were trying to, fight against that when they went across the state line to serve along other Union Army units. And it must have been daunting back then.
Yeah, I mean, the Confederacy issues a proclamation that essentially says if they, if there is a Black soldier and they are captured, they're not going to be treated as prisoners of war. They're either going to be, sent into slavery or killed. And again, 80% of the regiment is born free. So, never experiencing the institutions of slavery. Not saying that, they would not have experienced racism in the North, because this is apparent through the, civil rights fight that's being taken place by the Black community on the North Slope of Beacon Hill. There is racism in the North for sure, and many segregation practices, but that's a tall order. And those men, they still went and they fought with the risk of, not only facing, again, the hardships of the Union soldiers, but that's your freedom. That's your livelihood. That's your life that can literally be taken away, again, not because you're serving as a Union soldier, but because of the color of your skin. So these men truly, they are heroes, and they deserve that monument in bronze right across from the State House.
So one of the things I want to ask is, it's obvious you're white, and you're working in this area that is really, I mean, it's more than just a couple of monuments. It is a true part of the fabric of Boston history from the Black community side. What's your experience been like being a guide through that and dealing with that from a, you're not Black, so is it harder for you to be related to? Does it cause any kind of questions or issues? How's that worked out for you, Shawn?
I think it's a very fair question. And I think, with that being said, when people come up, because the Black Heritage Trail tour is, you kind of just show up and there's a ranger there waiting for you. And, I think, and rightfully so, we do have to come up and maybe not expecting to see me, but, have to really earn that trust. And I think that the way that we do that is by making sure that, we put a lot of time and effort into being factual, respectful, and letting people know that, this is not, I'm not trying to be a sage on the stage and stand here and tell you how much I know and be like, look at how smart I am. These stories are very inspiring. They are a part of who we are as a nation. And, I do my best to try and let those stories speak for themselves, and be like, I'm here to present these stories. I want you to get a good experience out of this. And, I think one of the most important things is, being respectful, being aware of the fact that, I am white as I'm telling these stories, and also doing your homework, doing the research,
Yeah.
and making sure that what you say is true and factual, and, being honest about things. I think that, being up there and telling those stories and, having to speak about the evils of slavery and the horrors of slavery and what people would have experienced, this is something that, obviously I can't relate to, but through their words, I can share those with you in those primary source documents to try and, help you, people that are visiting, understand these stories, and do, proper justice for them.
So you've been doing this for, over 8 years, and in a lot of ways, Boston has changed in the last decade for sure. With the big dig being done and the seaport building out and the demographic changing, have you seen the approach to your work with the monuments, with the tour, with the guiding change along with it, or are people still curious about this, even though the city has changed all around and Beacon Hills changed itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are definitely still interested. We've seen steady increases in numbers for people that are coming to visit our sites. I mean, I think the Black Heritage Trail is not as well known or as popular as the Freedom Trail. Faneuil Hall, I think, gets close to 2 million visitors a year or something like that. And, the Black Heritage Trail, we with the museum and people coming to the Shaw, it's definitely less. But I think that it's because these stories are very, very powerful. And because I think that, there are a lot of connections that people can make, really learning from this past and these stories, and people can make those connections to the present. One thing that we make very clear is that, while we are in uniform and while we are speaking, I'm not here to present a political opinion. Right. I'm here to present stories. I'm here to allow you to make those connections to those stories from our past. And if you make those connections, then, that's what we're doing. That's what we're here for. But, I think, especially when, for example, something happens, say, events in Charlottesville, there, I think, are definitely people that become interested in learning more about history. Right. And, with our sites being very focused on social revolutions and social justice, it's a natural space for people to come to kind of learn about the past and, see how that speaks to them in their present moment.
So people learn from you, people are around you, and you're around these monuments and these parts of Boston history every day. So when, I had a reaction when I heard about the monument being defaced, it was very similar to the other reactions I had about other monuments, even way before this, that got vandalized and destroyed. What's it like for you and your colleagues who are around this history every day? And it's after 8 years, it's not just a job anymore. It's something that you really believe in, to see what happened to that monument. What was that like?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Being here for 8 years, it's definitely something I'm passionate about, I care about. And, you never like to see anything like that defaced or vandalized or anything like that. But it has happened in the past, specifically to the Shaw. The sword gets stolen all the time. It's, there was an incident when I first started where somebody came and just threw a bunch of yellow paint on it. It can be cleaned. It has been cleaned. And, I think what we do and what we want to do is to make sure that when these things happen, people can use it as a learning opportunity. Learn more about this. Why do we not like when these things are defaced? Why is this monument so important? What does this stand for? I think the Shaw Memorial is put up in 1897. That's a year after Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a Supreme Court case that legalized, the doctrine of separate but equal and basically legalized segregation in the United States. It's constructed 3 years after the founding of the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1894, the organization that was pretty instrumental in the real uptick of Confederate markers that you see a lot being discussed, obviously, today. And this is a monument that's put up in a time period where our collective memory of the Civil War is shifting. And I think what this monument stands for, it's a real testament to what the Civil War was about. So it's important as a space of memory, but it also really is a call to action. Because, as many people have said, it's a reminder that, we need to keep moving forward. I think I have there's been a lot of people that have stood and spoken about the monument. And I think a really good quote actually is from the rededication ceremony in 1997, 100 years after it had been put up. And one of the keynote speaker actually was Colin Powell. And he said that the St. Gaudens Memorial speaks to us of our past, speaks to us of our present, and reminds us of the continuing challenges that will face us in the future. When we look at this great memorial, we see soldiers looking to the front, marching solidly and straight ahead on a perpetual campaign for righteousness led by their brave colonel. So let us too follow these heroes. Let us carry on the work to make this God-given beloved country of ours an even more perfect union, a land of liberty and justice for all. And, I think about that quote, and the things that he's saying, they really are timeless, because you look at that piece, and that is what I think is the message and what is so important and what people need to take away. When a monument shows up in the news, like the Shaw Memorial, and it's talking about it's been vandalized or it's been defaced, I think looking at it and learning and realizing what that monument stands for, that is the power in that public art. It's not just looking at a stagnant moment in time.
No, and that's why I'm very, I don't know about you, but I get an emotional connection. I mean, I can't imagine like if this had happened to the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Those events are still very much etched and fresh in the mind of the people who served in the greater, American, culture. So to me, that movie, the stories behind how the regiment came to be, and now the monument have to be, I would think, some ways, part of the conversation. And yet that quote is timeless, because that's why they wanted to serve. They wanted to show that, they were invested in this. And I think it's a lesson for us all in the future. And as you work through this, I mean, I got to ask, is the monument, for lack of a better term, restored, or is it in process? What's the condition of the monument now?
So actually, interestingly enough, so the monument has been cleaned. So we have many partner organizations who are working, work together to tell the story and also maintain the upkeep of the Shaw Memorial. The organization that cleaned it is called the Friends of the Public Gardens. And that is an organization that it does serve as kind of maintaining public spaces like the public gardens, the Boston Common, and also cleaning monuments and, general upkeep. But the fencing and the plywood and the things that were actually put around the Shaw were put there not because of protesting, but actually the Shaw Memorial itself, for about 2 years now, there's been a committee that is formed, and with a lot of partner organizations, the City of Boston, the Museum of African American History, Friends of Public Gardens, National Park Service. The Shaw is actually about to be removed for a $3 million restoration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The structural integrity, the monument itself is fine, but the structural integrity needs to have a lot of work done. So the monument's actually going to be removed. I think the timeline for it is in 5 or 6 weeks. This timeline also obviously with COVID has definitely changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the monument is going to be removed. The bronze is going to be taken to like a conservation space. Same with the marble. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to make the structure that it sits on much more sound.
Oh, wow.
They're going to put new concrete in, waterproof some stuff because there was some water damage. And the goal of that restoration then is it should be done by late fall, early winter, and then in 2021 there's going to be a rededication or re-unveiling of the monument.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, to make sure that, kind of, again, looking at that Colin Powell quote and others who have spoken about it, to make sure that it lasts for future generations, because it's a space of conversation, it's a space of celebration, and it is a space of protest. There have been protests and people who have been using that as a location due to its prominent, spot right across from the State House for now over a century.
Yeah, I mean, when work was work, and you'd walk, by the State House and walk right by it, and the first couple of times it didn't really click, and it's like, oh my God, that's the monument. It really took on a whole different significance for me. So I'm happy to hear that. And just curious, is there ways that if people want to help or support, the work you do and your peers do, and the national parks of Boston, is a way they can get involved, or, how can someone help if they want to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we welcome any and all people that are interested in this. I think one major thing is, for those who are interested, read more about it, learn more about this, and see why it's inspiring. But if you were interested in donations or anything of that nature, we point not only to ourselves, but definitely to our partners. The Friends of the Public Gardens, as I said, they're an organization that really is involved in cleaning monuments, upkeep of general spaces, and you can find them at their website.
I'll have that link into the show posting, everybody.
Great. All right. I will share both those links. I'll share
Great.
that link with you. And then also our partner, the Museum of African American History, which owns the historic African Meeting House, the oldest Black church still standing in the United States today. And
wow, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's on the north slope of Beacon Hill, and it was the center of that free Black community.
Check that out.
Yeah, once everything reopens, it's definitely a space.
So there's a very positive thing happening for the monument. It can still provide a connection to the past, but also inspiration for the future while educating the present. Do you have anything for yourself on the horizon, or is it really that this has become, a life work and passion for you, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, if they keep me around, I'd like to stay here. I've really enjoyed being able to connect with people, from bringing groups of fourth graders to see the monument and experience the Black Heritage Trail, to college students, to folks coming from all over the world,
That's amazing,
who want to learn about this stuff. So I really appreciate being able to be a steward of these spaces.
Awesome. Well, look, I just appreciate your time, coming on Oscar Mike Radio. As a person who served myself, I really look at the Civil War as a really interesting time in our country. There's been tons written about it. I'm not an expert by any means, but it was just odd to me that, both sides believed strongly what they were going to do, and, the hurdles that regiment faced, because it was them and then one other regiment out in Kansas, I want to say, that was Kansas was the first and Mass was the second, but Mass, it's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I think it's my understanding that the Massachusetts regiment was actually more active, really in the front lines in really severe battles, and really performed at a very high level and with distinction. So, I mean, that was a lot to be proud of for those who served.
Yeah, and that Kansas regiment was formed before the 54th Massachusetts, but it was formed before the Emancipation Proclamation. So basically, whenever you say anything is the first of anything, there's usually that asterisk next to it. But the 54th is officially recruited by the United States government. They are one of the first, and from the Civil War, like you said, they are one of the most notable African American regiments. and they're pretty instrumental in getting, now I believe the number in the last 2 years of the war, 180,000 African American men will eventually join the Union Army. And I always tell people when they come and visit on tour, that's like a tenth of the entire Union Army over 4 years. And black men are only allowed to fight in the last 2 years of the Civil War. And to put that number really in context, black men make up 10% of the entire Union Army, but only 1% of the North's entire population.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Without African American soldiers, the Union Army does not emerge victorious.
I didn't think of it in that kind of terms, never had those numbers presenting like that. So it's been very interesting hearing about that. And again, when this happened, I kind of re-engaged and looked it up and just appreciate your time coming forward. So, look, this is winding down, but is there any final thought you want to leave with us before we close? I just want to say thanks in advance for coming on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so speaking again to the Shaw Restoration, there is a committee that is made up of a bunch of different organizations, and the committee is coming together pretty regularly in planning out programs and things to engage in discussions about the 54th, to engage in discussions about the monument and what that monument means to people today. So I can share that information with you. But they are an organization in a group which, I am included in, that, I think is doing a great job of making sure that there is still, interest and discussions going on about the power of that monument.
Absolutely. Love to connect and definitely when the time comes, learn more and see the monument reopened, if you will. Well, we are closing down to number 199. 200 is next. And, it's just, in my view, Shawn, just to close this out, I feel very connected to monuments. Even as a kid, seeing certain things like the St. Louis Arch was a really profound effect on me, to this one. And folks, you can literally walk right by it at the State House and see it, and the significance cannot be understated. So, my guest is Shawn Quigley of the National Parks of Boston. My name is Travis Oscar Mike Radio. I want to thank you again, Shawn, for your time. Looking forward to talking again. And as we say in Hawk, missile in flight or mission in flight, we are out.